Hey, everybody. Welcome to the 58th episode of the Re-Federalist Report. I am Brady, also known as Warhamster. Joining me today is Doublas V Gibbs, Mr. Constitution, and my constitutional mentor.
58.
Yeah,
Wow.
58. And you've been on like 54 of them, so that's pretty good. And today we are doing we're resuming our journey through Madison's notes of the Constitutional Convention of 1787. This will be our 25th episode of Madison's notes. We took a break last week. We wanted to do a post-mortem of the California elections, and
Yeah.
I don't think we're done talking about that one yet. But
No, and as a matter of fact, just as a side note, Spencer Pratt has teamed up with Bass's brother. That's going to be interesting.
yeah, I saw that. And I was thinking we might actually want to review Trump's proposed executive order addressing the U.S. Postal Service. But I think I want to get back into Madison's notes today. We can do that offline, or you can do that on your website, because that is something that's definitely worth talking about.
Yeah, and as for this series of Madison's notes, real quick for those of you who are new, if you've missed any of the past episodes, definitely go back if you want. I mean, you're going to learn something. If you just start now, you're going to learn something. But if you want to get the full story, go back to the beginning. Share this with your friends, of course, but also something else that's important is understand that as a constitutionalist, and I've been studying this stuff pretty much my entire life. I really came into my own with my own mentor, Tim Loki Curlin, back around 2007. But Madison's notes is the direction he steered me for me to really understand what I thought I knew. And that's why it's so important for you to be here. You may be one of those folks that says, well, I know the Constitution pretty good. Everything you thought you knew will either be confirmed or destroyed by studying Madison's notes. So I definitely recommend that you not only spend time watching these programs, but also dive into the notes yourself. Avalon Project has it. There's a handful of books out there that have the notes. And then the second thing the last thing I wanted to say was Warhamster is one of the best researchers I know. I'm a pretty good researcher. But he's able to find deep dark corners that I don't even locate. And he researches this show. He really gets ahead of what we're going to talk about. And so what he has to say is very analytical, but that's a good thing. He's analyzed it, he's thought about it, and he's prepared for it. I, on the other hand, being lazy sometimes, don't read anything ahead of time. So you are getting my spontaneous reaction, but that actually makes for good programming, because you're going to hear his analysis and my memory of what I know, and combined it makes for a pretty good finished product. So sit in your seats, strap in, we're ready to roll.
Yeah, and on that note, it seems I go back and look at the viewership and which episodes people are watching, from week to week. And it seems that there's a few dozen people that are actually going back and watching the old episodes in order.
Okay.
Fantastic. We actually have some dedicated viewers and everything like that. So congratulations to you people that are doing that. I'm sure you're winning a lot of debates, both in person and online, on the original intent, because this is where the original intent comes from.
And you probably have developed your first answer now, or your first question, should I say, for someone who says they love history, love the founding fathers, and then you ask, right, who's your favorite founding father? And if they say Alexander Hamilton, you go, well, we need to talk.
This is true. And on that note, when we last left you, there is a gentleman by the name of Luther Martin, who had spent the previous day. We are now up to Thursday, June 28, 1787. And Luther Martin basically spent the entire day before with a very long-winded and sometimes intelligent rant. And he's a character.
Right.
You're going to want to watch the last episode for all the details on him, but he's going to start again, because he threatened to resume his discourse, and he's about to. You want to comment on Luther Martin real quick while I pull something up?
Well, yeah, Luther Martin is an interesting individual. He was a Maryland guy. So understand he's coming from a state that has a strong Catholic presence. And the thing is about him, now Luther Martin, is he was not happy about the Constitution when he left. I'm going to forward in time a little bit to help you understand the man today. He actually opposed the Constitution. He left the convention and refused to sign the document. He left the convention early. He didn't even finish the convention. He refused to sign it. He wouldn't want anything to do with it because he argued that it centralized too much power. It destroyed state sovereignty. It lacked a Bill of Rights. And so understand, he went into this convention strongly opposing the Virginia plan. He was not happy about it. He didn't like the ideas behind it. Now, Maryland is right next to Virginia. There's already a little bit of a rivalry. They're already worried about that big state of Virginia controlling everything. So he went into the convention with that in mind. He fought to preserve the Articles of Confederation. He did not like this idea that the Articles of Confederation wasn't going to be fixed. It was going to wind up being replaced by a Constitution. This is something that kind of ticked him off. And despite owning slaves, he opposed both slavery and the slave trade on the national stage, and he criticized what he considered to be compromises made on the institution within the new framework. He believed that they should have just straight outlawed slavery, and this is something that George Mason also argued. But you got to remember, one of the attitudes of people like Jefferson, who wasn't there, by the way, he was in France at the time, and Madison, a lot of these other founders, they believed that the best way to get rid of slavery was a gradual, incremental procedure to do it, process, not just outright, because they believed it would create animosity between the races, and it wouldn't be the right thing to do to those been enslaved, because I mean they had been raised or lived in this condition, and they didn't have the proper skills to take care of themselves. Luther Martin wound up being one of the guys that led the charge in Maryland to try to stop Maryland from ratifying the Constitution. And the reason why I bring all this up is I want you to understand, as you're reading it, this is a guy that was probably very close to George Mason's heart. Even more so. He is very nervous. He does not like what he's seeing. He is fighting for as limited of a government as possible, the sovereignty of the states to be protected as much as possible. This is his argument. Go ahead.
Okay. That's a pretty good prelude to Mr. Martin, and he's going to jump right into it. Mr. Martin resumes his discourse, contending that the general government ought to be formed for the states, not for individuals. That if the states were to have votes in proportion to the numbers of people, it would be the same thing whether their representatives were chosen by the legislature or the people. The smaller states would be equally enslaved, that if the large states would have the same interest with the smaller, as was urged, there could be no danger in giving them an equal vote. They would not injure themselves, and they could not injure the large ones on that supposition without injuring themselves. And if the interests were not the same, the inequality of suffrage would be dangerous to the smaller states. I'm going to stop there. This is a real big deal, especially the first sentence. Although it's all one long.
Yeah, he's recognizing the states as entities along with the people.
And that's, I talked about that on the summit where we're both involved in. Mm-hmm. We are not one nation. We are a union of sovereign states.
Right.
And that's really important, and that goes against this whole nationalistic, patriotic pride. USA, USA. But it's really it's a really important point. You can have both. You can be incredibly patriotic and proud of the Union without giving the general government, the central government, the power to rule over everybody, which is what we've become. And he's arguing against that right now. The other thing he's arguing right now is that the first issue of the Virginia plan, the very first thing we debated in this convention, was apportionment. Under the Articles of Confederation, once again, there was one representative per state, so the small states could gang up and bully around the big states. And Virginia plan wanted everything to be population based. And this is why we got the bicameral legislature. This is still being debating right now. They've pretty much settled on it, but here's Martin likes to talk.
Yeah, and people sometimes they feel like it's a contradiction. There's a little bit of a paradox here. Union of States, not national, but yet it begins "We the People." Well, then which is it, guys? And when they said "We the People of the United States," what they meant was not, of some empire or of some particular identity. It was a connection through liberty. It was a connection through these ideas. It was a meaningful connection but you got to remember, they saw themselves not as Americans, but as Virginians, Pennsylvanians, and so forth, New Englanders. They identified with their region or their state. And then it was joining a union that would become the United States. So, and that was a meaningful connection of the states, the people, their states, and the states to this union because of liberty and natural rights and this idea, not because of some empire or some national feeling, but because of an idea that they all united under. This is a totally different way of thinking than we are told today.
And what Doug is talking about is federalism. And the union exists. The only legitimate purpose of government is to preserve your God-given natural rights of life, liberty, property, and as Jefferson would put it in the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The only reason we form this union is for common defense, to handle international affairs, and to settle disputes between the states. And that is it. And if the government stuck to its lane right there, we'd be much happier and a lot better off. But that's not what happened. That's what they tried to form here. All right, that it will be in vain to propose any plan offensive to the rulers of states whose influence over the people will certainly prevent their adopting it. That the large states were weak at present in proportion to their extent and could only be made formidable to the small ones by weight of their votes. That in case a dissolution of the Union should take place, the small states would have nothing to fear their power. That if in such a case the three great states, which is Virginia, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania at the time, the three most populous, should league themselves together, the other 10 could do so too, and that he had rather see partial confederacies take place than the plan on the table. So he is definitely arguing for a looser union.
And he's arguing for such in order to protect the smaller states. So if they could band together and fight the bigger states, he did not. Once again, he's Maryland. He's right next to Virginia. He's like kind of stuck between Maryland and New York and Massachusetts, Pennsylvania. Is kind of in that little cubby hole there with Maryland and Delaware, and did not trust these larger states. And another guy who's also kind of in that cubby hole, New Jersey, would be Mr. Dayton. But when you get to the next part, I definitely want to discuss Lansing and Dayton for just a second.
Okay, well, let me get to that here in a second. I was looking for that slide that shows the populations of the states. I'll try to pull that up later. But okay, this was the substance of the residue of his discourse, which was delivered with much diffuseness and considerable vehemence. Madison's notes there. We talked about it last week, or 2 weeks ago. Luther Martin has shall we say, a little bit animated.
A, he didn't want to write every single word. B, he wanted to make sure that the mood was understood. Diffuseness and considered vehemence, that captures it pretty well. And the reason why I like this is because I tell people all of the time, because I hear this. We've never seen such disagreement, such political partisanship in our lives. Well, maybe not during our lives, but in the life of the country, absolutely. These guys weren't skipping through the daisies holding hands. They went at it. And I mean, there's a handful of times during the convention where it dang near came to fisticuffs.
All right, the next thing is basically Madison's commenting that Mr. Lansing of New York and Dayton of New Jersey moved to strike out the word "not" from the 7th article. We're not going to go back into that. You might read that the rights of suffrage in the first. See what it says. Right now they're arguing about language.
Yeah. Now, go ahead.
Mr. Dayton expressed great anxiety that the question might not be put till tomorrow, Governor Livingston being kept away by indisposition and the representation of New Jersey thereby suspended.
Okay, so now John Dayton was the youngest guy there. You think Pinckney was young? This guy was younger. And Dayton showed up late. He didn't show up until like the tail end of June. What date are we on right now?
We are at June 28th.
Okay, so he's been there about a week. Okay, and the understanding is that you have to have at least 2 delegates in order for your state to be able to really participate. So that's why they said the representation of New Jersey is thereby suspended, because Dayton's there by himself. And on top of that, he's only been there a week. So they're not going to let, New Jersey vote on things. He can talk. He can, discuss all he wants. Now, thing about Dayton is he like his predecessor, Martin Luther, there in the conversation, wanted to protect the small states. Well, New Jersey makes sense. And who's he teaming up with there? Lansing. John Lansing is a guy from New York who, unlike his compadre Hamilton, was also taking on a very anti-federalist kind of attitude. And in fact, Lansing, and it's coming up real soon, he and Robert Yates would walk out of the convention once they realized, you know what, they're going to create a centralized government. They're going to toss aside the Articles of Confederation. We're out of here. And so it's interesting that you see Dayton and Lansing team up there on what was it? They were asking to strike certain words, but they were of the same ilk in the sense of the way they were looking at it. Now that said, Dayton would wind up signing the Constitution.
Yeah, he was the youngest signatory. Interesting thing about his background, Dayton was a classmate of a guy by the name of Alexander Hamilton at the College of New Jersey, which became Princeton. Dayton would go. Well, it gets more interesting. Dayton would go on to. He supported Hamilton's policies, and he was definitely a Federalist. He served in both the House and the Senate. He would eventually be imprisoned in 1807 for treason because he sided with Aaron Burr after Burr tried to break away the Louisiana Territory. So he had a very colorful career.
Well, Dayton's interest at this point is the smaller states. He is definitely one who was advocating for the interests of smaller states. Yeah, now, he would also become a major Ohio land speculator. And you've heard of Dayton, Ohio? There you go. This is the guy it's named after.
Yeah, and his wealth is what he's the guy who funded Burr's breakaway republic.
Okay.
It was his money, which kind of, flies right in the face of the theory flying around out there that Aaron Burr is working in league with the British. All right. Mr. Williamson is going to speak next. This is Hugh Williamson of North Carolina. He thought that if any political truth could be grounded on mathematical demonstration, it was that if the states were equally sovereign now and parted with equal proportions of sovereignty, then they would remain equally sovereign. Okay, that makes sense. He could not comprehend how the smaller states would be injured in the case and wished some gentleman would vouchsafe. Is that how you say that word? Vouchsafe? I know what it means. I just don't know how to say it. I've read it a million times.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
He observed that the small states, if they had a plurality of votes, would have an interest in throwing the burdens off their own shoulders on those of the large ones. He begged that the expected addition of new states from the westward might be kept in view. Now, that's an important point because they know they've got the Northwest Territories. Mm-hmm. And they are going to be, those territories are going to become states. There's going to be a provision in the Constitution for how that happens.
There is anticipation by some also that someday that there might be a deal made with the British to extend to the Mississippi River. But and understand at this point, the French and the British are fighting over that land. It's mostly French land. But the French had been, remember, defeated in the French French and Indian War. So Britain has been pushing the French out because it's technically theirs. but there's still a lot of French there. There's still a lot of problems. But the Americans have been anticipating that is likely going to become American soil someday too. Not all of them think that, but a good number of them do. And so they're not just thinking of the Northwest Territory. They're thinking about that westward expansion that hasn't even really totally begun yet. But there's a few of them. In the writings of some of these founders, it's funny because you're amazed at how much forethought these guys had of what was on the horizon.
Yeah, indeed. And you mentioned Dayton, speculating in Ohio. That was one of the first territories to be added shortly thereafter. Dayton also fought in those French Indian Wars as a very young man. So he understood the territory we're talking about. They would be small states. You're talking about the new territories that would be added. They would be poor states. They would be unable.
When he says small states, understand, folks, he's talking by population, not by geography. Go ahead.
Exactly. They would be unable to pay in proportion to their numbers. Their distance from market rendering the produce of their labor less valuable. That's an important point.
Yeah, again, everything's by horseback at this point, folks.
Well, this is, there's a couple of points that need to be made here. Everything's horseback right now, but they're going to build a canal system. Those are the federally funded internal improvements that Hamilton was pushing for from day one. Once the new Constitution got put into place, and the canals opened up the Great Lakes, and the industrialists of the day, the robber barons of the day, got filthy rich, and those were the backers of the bigger government. They would consequently be tempted to combine for the purpose of laying burdens on commerce and consumption, which would fall with the greatest weight on the old states. Talking about tax burdens, and even at this early stage, you can already see the different regional interests are battling against each other. I've often said that the Civil War, air quotes, Civil War, was inevitable because you had the agrarian South with their financial interests vying against the New England states, which are much more a maritime mercantilist economy. And the two could have been complementary, but they do have a different conflict. There are conflicts of interest. And what he's saying
are you saying that the impetus that was behind this war may not have been just slavery, or may not have been slavery at all? Are you saying?
I think I've been saying that very loudly for quite some time.
All right, go ahead. Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
No, it's important. I never stop hammering that point home. It's a big deal.
Yeah. No, and that is the reason why I kind of joked about it, folks. Is the war between the states was not about slavery to anybody until the Emancipation Proclamation, and then Abraham Lincoln. He made the war about slavery with the Emancipation Proclamation. When that happened, what he was doing is he was pushing Europe out of the war, getting the Confederate States allies and supporters and suppliers out of the war. And that way he could finally make some ground and they could get it taken care of, and so on and so forth. After we're done with Madison's notes, there's two other episodes or series that we ought to do. One of them on the war between the states and a lot of that went on around that. But the other one, you bring this up a lot, and I wasn't going to say anything, but I'm going to say it. So you'll hear Warhamster mention the robber barons a lot. I don't like that term. I don't think it's an appropriate term. Not now, not yet. And in fact, I think that it was more about government, and you've heard me say this before. Government started it more than the wealthy capitalist entrepreneurs and so on and so forth. I am not saying it is the opposite of what Warhamster was saying, though, and they're all a bunch of innocent folk either. Oh, trust me, they're dang near as guilty as Warhamster makes them out to be. But I think there's other mechanisms there that need to be explored. It isn't just the robber barons. And we need to do an episode on that either after we're done with Madison's notes, or maybe slip one in sometime.
Sure. And, it's just since you mentioned Lincoln, whether, the war between the states was about slavery or not, you go back to the 1758 debates when he was running around Illinois debating Douglas. And Lincoln would speak to one crowd and say, we got to end slavery. Then he'd go to another crowd and say, no, we can figure out a way to make this work. He flip-flopped on it all the time. So for every quote,
his argument usually was to contain slavery.
Yeah, he didn't have a position. His position was he wanted political power.
Understand something too. Lincoln was by trade. He was a what? A lawyer.
Not just a lawyer, but a railroad lawyer, which means the kind of job was to take your land, railroad to go through.
Think about the time period and the law school and the legal type thinking that he went under. Who was Chief Justice during that time still? John Marshall. He went to the school of John Marshall. So keep that in mind too.
All right. James Madison's about to give us a very, very long statement. I don't know if his statement is any longer than
it's amazing. And let me say something about Madison on this statement here. He did not write everything he said because he's trying to write as he's talking. Trust me, whatever he had to say was longer than this. This is the concise version.
All right. Madison, of course, he's always speaking to himself in the third party. He was much disposed to concur in any expedient not inconsistent with fundamental principles that could remove the difficulty concerning the rule of representation.
Hey, boys, don't get ahead of yourself here. Settle down. Go ahead.
But he could neither be convinced that the rule contended for was just nor necessary for the safety of the smallest states against the large states. It's amazing they've spent over a month debating this issue. It was, and we talk all the time about the 17th Amendment and repealing Reynolds v. Sims. It is still an issue to this day. And for those who haven't watched before, the whole idea is you have to protect the small from the big. You have to protect the big from the small. And the same goes for your states. You want the rural people to be able to settle, decide rural issues versus the urban centers can decide urban issues. Now, everything in all these blue states, you've got one big blue city dominating the states, and it just doesn't work. If you look at Illinois, Oregon, Washington, California, New York.
The big state versus small state was one of the biggest issues of the day. And this is the reason why they chose to avoid democracy. Democracy had already historically proven itself to be a failed system. When you have a democracy, the big states or the population centers or the big cities dominate the vote. And then what happens, as you alluded to, is then you get city representatives telling farmers how to farm. And they knew that was a disaster. But they didn't know. But at the same time, there's this thought in your head, but if you have the most people, if you've got the most money, you ought to have a bigger voice. So how do you reconcile the two? And Madison would later explain that the best way is you make it so that all the voices are capable of sitting at the same table. You set the factions against each other. But if you do it through democracy, then only the large states or the large population centers are at the table. So what do you do to bring the other voices to the table?
And you take it to the nth degree, you end up with this shiny capital city, like, I don't know, Washington, D.C., dictating what the entire rest of the country does. And these people that live in D.C. never leave D.C. They're in a bubble. And there's no way they can make decisions that are going to benefit the vast majority of the people. It was never going to work, and it never should have turned out the way it has. That it was not just had been conceded by Mr. Brearley and Mr. Patterson themselves. The expedient proposed by them was a new partition of the territory of the United States. The fallacy of the reasoning drawn from the equality of sovereign states in a formation of compacts lay in confounding mere treaties, in which were specified certain duties to which the parties were to be bound, and certain rules by which their subjects were to be reciprocally governed in their intercourse, with a compact by which an authority was created paramount to the parties and making laws for the government of them. It's a long sentence. If France, England, and Spain were to enter into a treaty for the regulation of commerce with the Prince of Monaco and 4 or 5 of the other smallest sovereigns of Europe, they would not hesitate to treat as equals and to make regulations perfectly reciprocal.
Right.
Are you
He has rose-colored glasses as he looks to Europe at this point, I think.
saying they would treat fairly? Now, to some degree, that works with international treaties until the larger country decides that, at the point of a gun, they're going to enforce their will.
Until it decides, I am larger. I'm going to get my way.
Exactly. Would the case be the same if a council were to be formed of deputies from each with authority and discretion to raise money, levy troops, determine the value of coin, etc.? Would 30 or 40 million of people submit their fortunes into the hands of a few thousands? Well, that's what we've done, isn't it, Doug? If they did, it would only prove that they expected more from the terror of their superior force than they feared from the selfishness of their feeble associates.
I'm listening to this and I'm wondering if he's making the and it's kind of ironic considering what I said earlier, a fear of a robber baron type class. Is he alluding to that?
Yeah, to some degree, yes.
All right,
I think it goes back to one of the fundamental issues. Power corrupts. Absolute power corrupts. You need to decentralize. You need to decentralize the power.
Right. Well, and that goes back to my discussion recently for this a summit that we're a part of. Is what it came down to was a distribution of power. Because people ask, will ask, well, where is the, who has the power? Where is the power? And the idea was to distribute the power in such a way that nobody had the power. They had some power, but no part of government could rule on its own. It didn't have enough power. It was distributed in such a way that the states handle state issues, the federal government handles federal issues, the legislatures handle legislation. The executive executes the laws, the judicial adjudicates. That is their jobs, and that's all they do, a separation of powers and a diffusion of powers in such a way that no part of government, no people, no party could take total control. So if you are unable to take control, if you're unable to rule because of the way the system is constructed, then how do you rule from outside the system?
All right, this next little bit.
That's what he's fearing. This is, I think, what he's alluding here a little bit to. But anyway, all right, go ahead.
You're going to love this next couple of sentences because he's going to basically, this speaks to Reynolds v. Sims.
Okay.
Why are counties of the same states represented in proportion to their numbers? Is it because the representatives are chosen by the people themselves? So will be the representatives in the national legislature. What he's suggesting is, like in your state, your sovereign state's legislature, each county has equal proportion no matter the population. And there's a reason for that. Is it because the larger have more at stake than the smaller? The case will be the same with the larger and smaller states. Is it because the laws are to operate immediately on their persons and properties? The same is the case in some degree as the Articles of Confederation stand. The same will be the case in a far greater degree under the plan proposed to be substituted. This is some of the most important stuff about the founding documents. This is really the case. It's apportionment. Mm-hmm. In cases of captures, of piracies, and of offenses in a federal army, the property and persons of individuals depend on the laws of Congress. By the plan proposed, a complete power of taxation, the highest prerogative of supremacy, is proposed to be vested in the national government. Many other powers are added, which assimilate it to the government of the individual states. The negative proposed on the state laws will make it an essential branch of the state legislatures, and of course will require that it should be exercised by a body established on like principles with the other branches of those legislatures. Talking about the federal negative of state laws.
He's trying to justify it. So no, don't worry. We got this in place to allow it to, go right.
That it is not necessary to secure the small states against the large ones. he conceived to be equally obvious. Was a combination of the large ones dreaded? Remember, Madison's from Virginia, the most populous state at the time, with about 800,000 residents.
Do you really think we're that bad? That's what he's saying.
This must arise either from some interest common to Virginia, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania, and distinguishing them from the other states, or from the mere circumstance of similarity of size. And he's making a point here, and it's what I said earlier about the different types of economy. Would Virginia's interests be more aligned with Massachusetts and Pennsylvania than it would with Virginia's own neighbors, smaller neighbors? And that's a valid point.
Right.
Did any such common interest exist? In point of situation, they could not have been more effectually separated from each other by the most jealous citizens of the most jealous state.
Well, and that's a point right there also. Remember what I was saying before about on this program about people considering themselves Virginians, Pennsylvanians. They were very jealous of their state. They were very jealous of their state sovereignty and of their state's market economies and production and manufacturing. One of the biggest problems prior to the Constitution was that the states would hit each other with tariffs to protect their own manufacturing. And so he's kind of touching on this jealousy of the states that they put themselves so they were almost, I hate to say it this way because I don't think it's the right word, but it's the closest word I can get to what's in my head, is they were almost isolationists in the sense that they were, and you know, it's funny because people ask me about the militias, and I ask people, why did the states form the militias? And they said, well, to protect themselves from outside, you know, invaders. Well, who were those outside invaders? The other states in the beginning and the other colonies. They originally created the militias not only to protect themselves against the British, but from each other. This same mentality still exists at this point. All right, continue.
In point of manners, religion, capitalized because it's a big part of it, and other circumstances which sometimes beget affection between different communities, they were not more assimilated than the other states. In point of the staple productions, they were as dissimilar as any other states in the Union, any other three. He's talking about the big three states. The staple of Massachusetts was a fish, of Pennsylvania it was flour, and of Virginia tobacco. So different economies.
Mm-hmm.
Was a combination to be apprehended from the mere circumstance of equality of size.
Well, and let's stop there. It's not just what it is, how much is produced, and their size, but it's also who's going to be their trade partners. If your primary product is fish, you're not trading with Europe, right? It's domestic. Flour could be either. Tobacco, to be honest, most of the tobacco trade was overseas. So, you know, it's not just what it is and how much and all that, but it's who their trade partners is. So the difference of the different economies is even greater than I think we're understanding, and that he's even saying. There was so many minutia, you know, individual kind of differences, idiosyncrasies, that every state had to operate kind of as its own little country. Continue.
Well, no, that's I'm going to expand upon what you just said. And that's why Doug and I hammer so hard on economics, because politics is downstream from your economic interests. And they understood that very, very well, that people are going to vote with their wallets, and they're going to vote for policies that protect their wallets and their own financial interests. And because we have such disparities of economics, and what is your stable crop? And as Doug just said, tobacco's got to be shipped overseas. So therefore, the agrarian South is going to want friendly relations with their trading partners in Europe, whereas the maritime New England is competing on the open seas with Europe. That's going to be a more contentious relationship. That's going to dictate different foreign policy, different politics domestically as well. And so we do have different interests, but the point he's making is there's no reason for Pennsylvania and Virginia to all of a sudden say, hey, let's team up against everyone else. And he's got a valid point. It's more regions that team up. So it's more, I guess it's more important for the populations to be dispersed across the country, so it doesn't happen.
And something else that's also understood is every state had its own factions, and they were different factions, and they were competing factions. In a sense, only to look at this metaphorically, it's like saying that the mob in New York, the mob in Chicago, and the mob in some other big city are going to get together because, they're mobs. They're competing. They probably don't like each other.
And to your point, the competing stuff in each state is almost always going to be urban versus rural, city against the countryside, and because they do have different interests, but they have.
You also had different factions that were control. You had certain families or certain industries that were dominant in certain states, and it's like the old saying. I'd rather be a medium-sized fish in a small pond than a huge fish in the ocean. If I'm a medium fish in this pond, I'm probably the big fish. But the moment I get out in the ocean, I am no longer. I'm not even a big fish because there's things much bigger. And so it really was more regional factions at the time. And Federalist 10, and I know I mentioned Federalist 10 almost to the point of a cliche, but Federalist 10, Madison discusses all of this. He discusses factions. He discusses what's going on. And once again, his conclusion, and once again, Federalist 10, of course, is written after his time in the Constitution. He's a much wiser man by then than he is here. But he comes to the conclusion the best way to control the factions is to set them against each other. Give them all enough of a voice that they compete directly and there's no unfair advantage. And this, I think, is a large reason why the Senate was formed the way it was.
He goes on, he says, experience suggested no such danger, talking about big states colluding. The journals of Congress did not present any peculiar association of these states in the votes recorded. It says they have not teamed up in the past. Why do you think they'll do so in the future? It had never been seen that different counties in the same state, comfortable in extent but disagreeing in other circumstances, betrayed a propensity to such combinations. Experience rather taught a contrary lesson. Among individuals of superior eminence and weight in society, rivalships were much more frequent than coalitions. Go backtrack 3 minutes. That's exactly what Doug just said. Among independent nations, preeminent over their neighbors, the same remark was verified. Carthage and Rome tore one another to pieces instead of uniting their forces to devour the weaker nations of the earth. The houses of Austria and France were hostile as long as they remained the greatest powers of Europe. England and France have succeeded to the preeminence, to the enmity. To this principle, we owe perhaps our liberty.
Now, let's stop for just a second, because this brings Dayton back to mind a little bit too. While Dayton defended the small states, he also believed that there was a certain level of aristocracy, maybe not official aristocracy, but that a certain type of wealth and power and position existed. There was society, and then there was everybody else. And that's also what's kind of being alluded to here. Basically, Madison's saying, well, when you get to, we're not talking about the little people. When you get into society, well, it's a dog-eat-dog world. And that's kind of what he's saying. And he's kind of alluding to what Dayton had said earlier. And then now he's using the aristocracies of Europe to prove his point. Remember that all these guys, and John Taylor Caroline writes this in his book, A New View of the Constitution of the United States, which gets published in 1823, much later than this, that all of the signers went in as nationalists, as elitist-minded, as almost aristocracy-minded individuals. While they wanted liberty, and once again, it seems like a paradox. In a way, it is a little bit. While they all wanted liberty for all, they all believed in we the people of the United States. They also saw themselves as being kind of members of a higher class, that they were a part of society that understood more so than anybody else. And perhaps they were right to a certain extent. Some of them were unable to let go of that at all. And this is kind of the battle that's going on here, is not just what's being said, but the premise. The premise is that of a societal force that exists, and that and this is something that's going to take a long time for them to shake. Go ahead.
What it says next is really important. Coalition between those powers would have been fatal to us. Among the principal members of ancient and modern confederacies, we find the same effect from the same cause. The contentions, not the coalitions of Sparta, Athens, and Thebes, proved fatal to the smallest members of the Amphictyonic Confederacy. It's Greek. The contentions, not the combinations of Prussia and Austria, have distracted and oppressed the Germanic Empire. Were the large states formidable singly to their small neighbors? On this supposition, the latter ought to wish for such a general government as will operate with equal energy on the former as on themselves. What he's basically saying is the reason we haven't had this one global government or some dominant empire like they had back in Rome is because the different powers compete with each other instead of joining together.
At large, small, it doesn't matter. He's saying even the small, are competing. Even they disrupt it. And I think in a way he's sort of recognizing a little bit of the validity of what someone like Dayton was saying, but at the same time hanging on to this Virginia plan idea. I think we're beginning to see a little bit of his metamorphosis, his growth, his evolution.
Well, this next sentence may have you hesitate on that. So he says,
okay,
the more lax the band, the more liberty the larger will have to avail themselves of their superior force. So he's arguing for a strong government right there.
I think he's saying, though, that because the more lax the band means, the more it stretches. So while he's saying, it should be a little bit looser. I get that, because you do that, the larger states may let go of their superior force, or they may take it. So we'll see. So I think he's kind of riding the fence on this a little bit. But anyway, continue.
Here again, experience was an instructive monitor. What is ye situation of the weak compared with the strong in those stages of civilization in which the violence of individuals is least controlled by an efficient government?
That's definitely a bigger government statement. Go ahead.
He's saying that, the stronger the central government is, the less ability the big states would have to pick on the little ones. The heroic period of ancient Greece, the feudal licentiousness of the Middle Ages of Europe, the existing condition of the American savages answer this question. What is the situation of the minor sovereigns in the great society of independent nations, in which the more powerful are under no control but the nominal authority of the law of nations?
It's fascinating that he brings up the population that was there before the settlers arrived, the American savages being the American Indians. And what he's basically saying is, they have no centralization whatsoever. Look at their condition. They're savage. They're out of control, and we're pushing them aside easily, is pretty much what he's saying. Go ahead.
Is not the danger to the former exactly in proportion to their weakness? But there are cases still more in point. What was the condition of the weaker members of the Amphictyonic Confederacy? Plutarch, Life of Themistocles,
there you go,
will inform us that it happened, but too often that the strongest cities corrupted and awed the weaker, and that judgment went in favor of the more powerful party. What is the condition of the lesser states in the German Confederacy? It's funny he uses the term German Confederacy, just because Bismarck would not actually create a Germany for another 100 years.
And at the time you did have a bunch of warring provinces, a bunch of warring regions, but the area was still known to be that of the Germanic people. So,
yeah.
And again, while you think he's arguing for bigger government than I do think I'm starting to see some cracks in his big government resolve. He's still arguing for a bigger government, and we have to remember going into this, they understood that the Articles of Confederation were too weak. He's not going to argue for something that's as small as Articles of Confederation. He is going to argue for something that is larger, that is more centralized. The question is, where is the point of too far? Where is that line?
We all know that they are exceedingly trampled upon, and that they owe their safety as far as they enjoy it, partly to their enlisting themselves under the rival banners of the preeminent members, partly to alliances with neighboring princes, which the Constitution of the Empire does not prohibit. What is the state of things in the lax system of the Dutch Confederacy? Holland contains about half the people, supplies about half the money, and by her influence, silently, indirectly, governs the whole republic.
So in other words, they have what basically is Articles of Confederation, and look what's happened. The big states in control. But you got a tighter system there in Germany, and the big states can't control it.
In a word, the two extremes before us are a perfect separation and a perfect incorporation of the 13 states. In the first case, they would be independent nations subject to no law, but the law of nations. In the last, they would be mere counties of one entire republic, subject to one common law. In the first case, the smaller states would have everything to fear from the larger. In the last, they would have nothing to fear, because there's a one common law ruling over all. That's an argument for nationalism.
And the thing about Madison, and I think it's one of the reasons that I've always been attracted to James Madison, is his debate style has always been to use examples, and that's mine. And so I guess I've always kind of felt a kinship with him in that sense. And let me reiterate what I said a moment ago a little bit. Of course, he's going to argue for bigger government because what they're trying to create is something bigger and stronger and more centralized than the Articles of Confederation. Whether or not he's arguing for something that we have accomplished today, something that the Anti-Federalists feared it would become, I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. But I do know that he is going to take a stance that we need something bigger than what we've got. We need something more centralized than what we've got, because what we got under the Articles of Confederation is dangerous because it's a confederation, it's too loose, and it cannot maintain the union.
He continues, says the true policy of the small states therefore lies in promoting those principles and that form of government which will most approximate the states to the condition of the counties. Another consideration may be added. If the general government be feeble, the large states, distrusting its continuance and foreseeing that their importance and security may depend on their own size and strength, will never submit to a partition. Give to the general government sufficient energy and permanency, and you remove the objection. Gradual partitions of the large and junctions of the small states will be facilitated, and time may effect that equalization which is wished for by the small states now, but can never be accomplished at once.
Hey, give it a chance, guys. Give it a chance. You've already decided it can't work.
All right, our good friend.
I think he's arguing that they're trying to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, but he's also saying trust this centralized government we're creating. We'll make sure everybody's treated fairly, because otherwise.
And again, he has to argue for something bigger than the Articles of Confederation. The question is, does he understand where the limit's supposed to be at this point, and is he able to put that across to them? And do they recognize that if it's bigger, where is that limit? Once again, they're still searching. They have not figured out the exact limitations yet.
Next to speak is James Wilson of Pennsylvania. And we're going to have to talk more about Wilson as we go on, because he'd be a prominent voice for quite some time and was wrong about many, many things. His famous state yard speech was the rare exception to where he got something right. So probably going to disagree with what Wilson says next. The leading argument of those who contend for equality of votes among the states is that the states as such being equal and being represented not as districts of individuals, but in their political and corporate capacities, are entitled to an equality of suffrage. According to this mode of reasoning, the representation of the boroughs in England, which has been allowed on all hands to be the rotten part of the Constitution, is perfectly right and proper. They are like the states, represented in their corporate capacity like the states, therefore they are entitled to equal voices. Old Sarum to as many as London. And instead of the injury supposed hitherto to be done to London, the true ground of complaint lies with Old Sarum. For London, instead of 2, which is their proper share, sends 4 representatives to Parliament. He's making the argument for the population-based. Any thoughts?
Not at the moment.
Okay, next we have Roger Sherman, Connecticut.
Now, I've always respected Roger Sherman, but at the same time, sometimes he bothers me because he's so busy trying to look for making sure everybody get along and compromises. Sometimes it would get a little on the ridiculous side, but let's see what he has to say here.
And if you read through these Madison's notes, quite often his name is misspelled as Sharman. Don't squeeze the Sharman. And and Madison goes back and forth between the two, and I'm not sure why. The question is not what rights naturally belong to men, but how they may be most equally and effectually guarded in society. Correct. And if some give up more than others in order to attain this end, there can be no room for complaint. To do otherwise, to require an equal concession from all, if it would create danger to the rights of some, would be sacrificing the end to the means. That's brilliant. The rich man who enters into society along with the poor man gives up more than the poor man, yet with an equal vote he is equally safe. Were he to have more votes than the poor man in proportion to his superior stake, the rights of the poor man would immediately cease to be secure. This consideration prevailed when the Articles of Confederation were formed. I would say I agree with every single thing in that paragraph.
And remember, he's following up after James Wilson, who was very good at shielding what he believed. He had a big government mentality that we even see in the modern sense, but yet he was able to shield it so well. He basically would argue, no, don't misunderstand me, guys. We need a big centralized government, but not because I believe in big government, but because that's the only way to, protect individual liberty and ensure, the people are involved.
And the other thing, interesting thing about Pennsylvania is, we've talked about this on our show, on your show with Ron Partey and the Untold History Channel.
Right.
So Pennsylvania is predominantly Quakers, and the Quakers are sort of an international society. I wouldn't call them secret society, but they're a society of their own. They had the international economic interests just among Quakers. It was Quaker first, everyone else second. They definitely had an insular mentality. They were bankers. And if you know me, that's not necessarily a compliment. The determination of the question from striking out the word not was to put off until tomorrow at the request of the deputies of New York. See opposite page and insert the speech of Dr. Franklin in this place. Let's go down to that. Okay, we don't have that speech here. Mr. President, addressing the President of the Congress, the small progress we have made after 4 or 5 weeks, close attendance and continual reasonings with each other are different sentiments on almost every question. Seldom of the last producing as many no's as ayes, is methinks a melancholy proof of the imperfection of the human understanding. We indeed seem to feel our own want of political wisdom since we have been running about in search of it. We have gone back to ancient history for models of government and examined the different forms of those republics which, having been formed with the seeds of their own dissolution, now no longer exist. And we have viewed modern states all around Europe, but find none of their constitutions suitable to our own circumstances. In this situation of this assembly, groping as it were in the dark to find political truth, and scarce able to distinguish it when presented to us, how has it happened, sir, that we have not hitherto once thought of humbly applying to the Father of lights to illuminate our understandings? Doug, I'm sure you want to jump into the Father of lights.
No, this is Franklin's language, Benjamin Franklin, if ever there was. And this is, of course, drawing from biblical texts where the Bible actually does refer to God as the Father of lights. But understand something. He's basically saying we all along prayed that we would get through this American Revolution. We depended on a godly influence, godly guidance. But have we decided to abandon that? Have we not thought, gosh, maybe we ought to, reach out and, call out to God? Now, what's happening here is after all of these discussions, what's happening here, and this sounds like Franklin, but it didn't say it was Franklin talking.
I think it does. I think what he's saying right now is see opposite page and insert the speech of Dr. Franklin. Okay. And that's what he's doing. So
because what Franklin is doing here is he's saying, hey, we've spent all this time arguing. We were on our knees of prayer during the revolution. Have we forgotten? I mean, if we're going to continue here, if this is going to make sense, if we're going to be able to build this new house on stone rather than on sand, we need to be calling out to our powerful friend. We need to be in prayer. This is Benjamin Franklin saying we need to pray before each session. Ultimately, while they do debate whether or not and shoot it down in the sense of bringing in the clergy, a large contingency of the delegates do wind up going down the street to the closest church and entering prayer. But that's what this is. Right, this is a call.
And here he is. This is definitely Franklin. In the beginning of the contest with Great Britain, when we were sensible of danger, we had daily prayer in this room.
That's what I was just saying, yeah.
Our prayers, sir, were heard, and they were graciously answered. Doug, I thought Benjamin Franklin was a deist.
Well, the way I like to put it is, if he wasn't a very good one. Let's explore Benjamin Franklin just a moment. Benjamin Franklin was raised in a very Christian household. The foundational principles were there from his very beginning. There's a saying from the Bible that I can't remember what verse, what book it is, but if you bring a child up, in God, he will not. If he departs, he will return to that foundation. And that's what Franklin ultimately did. He was given that foundation. As he got older, he's a young man. He's got other interests. He becomes an inventor. He gets into science, gets into ladies. He was quite known for being quite the womanizer in France. When he was there and all of this. But as he gets older, especially through the American Revolution, he goes, whoa, there is no way we should have pulled that off. There is only one possible way it could have happened. God. And that's what he's saying here. We knew we had no chance. We were on our knees. We were in prayer. And so he also, and the entire speech isn't here. In his at the beginning of his speech, what he says is, as I've gotten older, I have come to realize, I have begun to see, it's like the old saying, right? When you're young, you're one political ideology. When you get older, you become a little wiser, a little more conservative. In your old age, you become a different ideology. And that's kind of the way it was for him. As he's gotten older and he's gone through his experience and his wisdom has taken shape, he has to realize, there really is a God. My parents were right. And there has to be, because there's no way we could have won the American Revolution without it, without God by our side. No way. And now we think that we are so wise and so brilliant and so prideful that we're going to do this without asking for God's hand here. And so that's kind of what he's going. And I don't believe the entire speech is here, because there's a couple of other parts that I don't think I see here that he says. One of the other things he says is, if he is capable of knowing every sparrow that falls to the ground, do we not think he's capable of being involved in the affairs of men and the creation of empires? Oh, there it is. I found it. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid?
Right.
Go ahead and read the whole thing, but I did find it. But I think there's parts of it missing here.
All of us who I'll look for it and bring it back next week if there's more.
Okay.
All of us who are engaged in the struggle must have observed frequent instances of a superintending providence in our favor. To that kind providence, God, we owe this happy opportunity of consulting in peace on the means of establishing our future national felicity.
All right, stop right there. The next part is, it is all there. The next part is what I'm remembering. What you're getting ready to read next, from him suddenly, as he's gotten older, seeing things a little bit better. And the spirit, all of that. And this is my favorite part of the speech. Listen carefully, folks. This is Benjamin Franklin, the deist. Go ahead.
And have we now forgotten that powerful friend? Or do we imagine that we no longer need his assistance? I have lived, sir, a long time. And the longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid?
How many times did you hear me talk about that section of the speech in class when I taught the Constitution classes?
Just a few.
Quite a bit. Yeah, that's like among my favorite lines spoken by the founding fathers. Benjamin Franklin, and it's funny because when I hear about people say, well, there were a bunch of deists, or Franklin and Jefferson were deists. And Franklin, they're the Constitutional Convention. Jefferson, of course, the author of the Declaration of Independence, which mentions God 4 times. If they were deists, neither one of them are very good at it. Simple as that. But anyway, go ahead.
We have been assured, sir, in the sacred writings, that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. I firmly believe this, and I would also believe that without his concurring aid, we shall succeed in this political building no better than the builders of Babel. We shall be divided by our little partial local interests. Our projects will be confounded, and we ourselves shall become a reproach and byword down to the future ages. And what is worse, mankind may hereafter, from this unfortunate instance, despair of establishing governments by human wisdom and leave it to chance, war, and conquest.
That is a fantastic statement right there. History, that he's talking about history. This is not history. This is us. We are not history. We are not, just those systems that somehow develop by chance, war, and conquest. We are sitting here and we are developing something. If we're going to develop something and we're going to develop it in his name, should we not consult him? And then the next part is where he makes that recommendation.
He says, I therefore beg leave to move that henceforth prayers imploring the assistance of heaven and its blessing on our deliberations be held in this assembly every morning before we proceed to business, and that one or more of the clergy of this city shall be requested to officiate in that service.
Okay, now stop right there. What we are getting ready to enter into is who Hamilton really is. Hamilton, and I don't want to run the story here, but Hamilton is opposed to this. Now, I don't know what was going on in his head, but what he winds up saying is he fears that the people, if they're praying to God, would feel like they didn't know what they're doing, so they're begging for God's help. That's the way he kind of puts it out there as. They wind up debating this for 4 days, by the way. So think about this for a second. You got a group of men who almost all of them come from a very strong Christian background. remember at the time, to get a university degree, universities were seminaries.
Indeed.
So they spent a lot of time in the Word, and they're debating for 4 days on whether or not to pray. Of course, ultimately, the excuse is that they can't afford the clergyman that Franklin calls to, lead them. And plus, they don't want prying eyes from the outside, know what they're up to. And please, once again, don't misunderstand that. It's like I don't want prying eyes in the kitchen when I'm cooking something, not because I'm doing something nefarious, but because I don't know if they'd appreciate everything I'm putting into the dish because they don't understand how to cook that dish like I do, right? That was the thinking.
We're going to cut off there because they're going to debate everything. Doug just gave you a really good prelude to next week, and well, we don't want to give away next week's plot entirely.
Too much.
Yeah, but that might have been Franklin's one of his best gifts to the entire convention.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
This isn't working. Every vote's going, 7-6, and we're not coming to conclusions. We're going around in circles. We can't look at history because all of those republics in the past failed. We need some divine guidance, and we should look to the Bible for that. So when people say that the Constitution was not founded, didn't discuss God, here's your evidence right there. That it absolutely
God
did.
is indeed in the Constitution. I wrote a book, by the way, titled that, God in the Constitution.
I was just going to set you up for that. Hey, where can everybody find that book, Doug?
Well, on Amazon, but you know what? Just a few days ago, I made a post about that book at douglasvgibbs.com. If you go to the blog, read a little bit about it, and then there should be a link there to buy it at Amazon. All of my books are available at Amazon for now, because that's who publishes my books at the moment. Yes, I know nobody likes Amazon. Well, this is the best place. This is the best online marketplace out there. Whether you like their politics or not, that is the reality. So just put Douglas V. Gibbs books or books by Douglas V. Gibbs. And if you want specifically look for God in the Constitution, enter its title. You can also go for links to all of my books, navigation2liberty.com. That's navigation, the number 2, liberty.com. I have turned that particular site into my book site. Ultimately, what the plan is for that website is to turn it also into a Constitution education seminar site. That's down the road. Navigation2liberty.com, navigation, the number 2. You got to put the number 2, liberty.com. And the list of all my books are there, what's upcoming. And then when you get to the list, hit the links. It'll take you straight to the Amazon page. And douglasvgibbs.com for all of my blog writing, videos, everything. And I'm starting to put even the videos of this show there. If you scroll down, I actually have one post on my videos page and on the blog where a link to every single episode of this series is there. Just go into the search bar and look up Re-Federalist, Madison's notes.
Yeah, it's interesting. Rumble. By the way, if you're watching this, you probably know where to find me, so I'm not going to do that as well. But on Rumble, you can go in there and look at where you can search by the referral for where someone clicked on the link from. And Douglas V. Gibbs keeps popping up really high on my page.
Cool.
Yeah.
See, I'm a value of the show after all.
Who would have guessed?
Who would have guessed? And let me say this real quick. I don't just recommend the show because I think it's important information. You need to know Madison's notes. I really do enjoy being a part of this. And I think that our joy of putting out this information comes across on the video screen. So do us and everybody a favor. Let people know, because this is not just a presentation. I think people enjoy the presentation because of our passion. And I appreciate that appreciation. So make sure you follow this page, that you hit anything you need to make sure you get news of when the next episode is. And then you go to find where it says share, get that link, and send it out to everybody you know.
Yeah, and this show is growing. We're getting close to 1,500 views in the first week of each airing, and that's pretty good numbers. It's the biggest it's been. And we're going to keep on going. We've got many, many more shows to go.
Very good, very good. And you know what? When we're done, we're either going to be in nursing homes by the time we're done with this, or we'll be prepared for the next series. We'll see. But when we are done with it, there are going to be other series. I mentioned earlier, I want us to do the War Between the States, the robber barons, and other series. Declaration of Independence, line by line, might be a good series for us to do.
I want to do a show.
We're educators. We want you to learn this information so that you are a better patriot.
Yeah, I want to do a show on the Pledge of Allegiance next, because there's, in fact, we may have to get that in sooner because there's some problematic issues with that.
I've told the story a few times in class. Bellamy was quite the socialist, but I don't want to give it away too much here.
All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. Until next time. Cheers.